Are you thinking of doing a family Camino? We are, kind of. I'll explain, coming right up. So lots of people go as a family on Camino. There's a lady on one of the online forums, and my apologies if I forget, but she has something like 7 kids, I think, or was it 9? And she has taken them all on Camino, and I think Grandpa went one time, and they all had an amazing experience. I've only ever gone on my own or with Pat, my wife. So why am I even talking about a family Camino? Ronnie, it's your fault. We were at a family function a little while back, and we're all sitting back there, and they all know that Dad talks endlessly about the Camino. And Ronnie turned around and said, what about doing a family one? And that sowed the seed, and I thought, maybe. But being a typical sort of hyper planner, super planner, I started thinking through what are the pros and cons of this, what are some of the pitfalls, what are some of the logistics challenges, and I thought I'd share it with you. So if you're thinking of walking a family Camino, I don't know if I'd be brave enough to do it as a first Camino, but maybe because you don't know what you're in for, you would do it. I mean, having walked a few Caminos, I immediately think of all the logistics issues. If you haven't walked one, yeah, maybe ignorance is bliss. But anyway, let's move on. These are the things that I would think about, and if my kids are watching this and grandkids, these are the things that you should be thinking about. So why do you want to walk it is the first thing. Does everyone have the same expectations? So I think as far as my kids go, they're typical Aussie, I call them kids. I mean, they're all adults and most of them have got their own kids. But typical Aussies, they've travelled all over the place. They love travel, new experiences. They're all pretty active. So I think the idea of, walking through Spain and lots of great food and wine and stuff is appealing to them. But we probably need to dig a little bit deeper and sort of understand really what the goal is. Is it just going to be a nice walk in nature for a little while? That's fine. We're not going to get, I don't know how many of us there would be, probably 12. That's a challenge. You're not going to get 12 people all aligned in terms of what they expect to get out of it. So that's an important thing to begin with. You kind of have to plan, I think, for the lowest, I was going to say the lowest common denominator, but that sounds insulting, doesn't it? But probably the lowest expectation level and kind of match around that. So that brings me on to the next question is how far are we going to walk? So who's going? Like we've got ages from 40 to, down to 5 or 6. Everybody's reasonably fit, but how far do we want to walk each day? Most people should be able to walk 15, 20 Ks, if not more. Some will want to walk more. Some of them are pretty fit. Some of them very fit. So we need to think about how far we're going to go. How much time do we want to spend on the Camino? I don't think, if they're not really into it, they're not going to want to go and spend a month like I do. They wouldn't be able to get that much time off work. So is it going to be a week? I'm not sure a week is enough to really get the flavour of the Camino. I'd probably be pushing for 10 days, 7 to 10 days. We're all in Australia. We're all going to head over there. We're not just going to walk for 7 days and come back, because that's a heck of a waste of the cost of travel. So what other things do people want to do? In my mind, we would walk the Camino and then go off and do whatever else we wanted to do. I think it would be a little bit harder for people to be doing their own thing and then we all have to meet in Madrid on a certain day or something like that. Oh, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. Let's edit that out. So how long do we want to be there? Another aspect would be what type of experience do we want to have? And that kind of goes across many, many different things. A lot of it comes down to budget. What type of accommodation do we want to stay in? What type of food do we want to have? So when I'm planning, I do a rough budget around the type of accommodation that I know Pat and I will be using. I know roughly what we like to spend on food. We can be quite frugal, but we also like to have some nice meals too. So you have to be considerate to what other people's budgets are. And that's, it's probably a family discussion around, what form do we want this to take? Are we going to be cooking in albergues? Are we going to go out for cheap meals? Or, how's that all going to work? So the type of experience, the route itself, this requires a little bit of thought, because if there's 12 of us walking, it's quite hard to get 12 beds in the same spot. Walking alone is dead easy. Walking as a couple is pretty easy. You might say, well, walk on the Camino Frances because that's got the most infrastructure and the most beds. It's also got the most people. And I think trying to find 12 beds in a place would be nigh on impossible. If we were to walk the Camino Frances, I would probably do something which I tend not to advise, and that is I would book the whole thing prior, purely because we're trying to get 12 beds in one spot. So I'd probably plan all the distances, all the stopping points, and book all the accommodation, purely because there'd be quite a few of us. The other alternative would be a more remote route. That's not going to suit the grandkids. They're not going to want to be able to, they're not going to have to walk too far. You've got to think about maybe public transport options if they're flagging a bit. So you probably want a route, I'm thinking, for us, we probably want a route with lots of infrastructure, where there's lots of options for stopping for breaks. I mean, I was thinking even on the Via del Plata last year, walking that, all the villages I went through, there were kids' playgrounds and stuff to amuse kids. You've got to start thinking about that kind of stuff. The next thing that springs to mind is gear. I don't want the family going out and spending, huge amounts of money on gear. So I feel an obligation to kind of advise them on what's the minimum spend you can get away with. Some good footwear. It's only going to be for a week, 10 days. We don't have to go nuts. Kind of use what you've got. I've got a couple of spare backpacks. Try and sort of minimise the outlay on any new gear, I think. Then I've got a note here about communication. So I think if there was a group of us like that, we're not going to walk as a group of 12 people, because you all walk at different speeds. Walking at someone else's speed is a surefire way to get injured. It might sound strange. If you've never walked a Camino, it probably does sound a bit odd, but if you're going to walk 10Ks, 15Ks, 20Ks, a little bit faster than you normally do, a little bit slower than you normally do, it creates all sorts of issues with your leg muscles and back and all kinds of stuff. You need to walk at your own comfortable pace. So when Pat and I walk, for example, we kind of go like this, because I like to stop a lot. I walk a bit quicker than her, but I stop a lot to take video and photos, and she just keeps going. So she overtakes me, and then I'll overtake her. And I like to stop on the hills and have a break. She keeps going. So you imagine 12 people strung out. We need some good communication. So I think I'd ensure that everybody had a local SIM card. We'd probably set up a family WhatsApp group, and we could communicate that way. And it would make sense probably, if we were walking the Frances, for example, pick a town. It's ages since I walked the Frances. We're heading for Melilla today. We'll meet in Melilla at this particular spot, and then we can keep in touch during the day. Having said Melilla, I wouldn't be taking them on the final 100 of the Frances, I don't think. So communication would be really important. Individual as a family and so on. You then need to think about what happens if something goes wrong. So what if somebody gets injured? What if somebody gets sick? What if someone can't continue? So we need a plan around that. If my son and his wife and 2 kids have a problem, they have to go home, how's that going to work? They're all sensible adults, but you need to think it through. We need to get to a town where they can get a train, and are they going to, do we call off the whole thing? Do they just go home? Or just think through the different scenarios. In terms of preparation, they're all pretty fit, but I'd probably ask them to do a little bit of simple preparation. They're probably all fitter than me, to be honest, but some walking with a pack, and that kind of stuff. The other consideration I've got here is, would we treat it like a guided Camino or totally independent? So what I mean by guided, maybe if I was going to plan out, let's say it's a 10-day Camino, and because we're trying to get the 12 beds, if I planned it all out and booked all the accommodation, we kind of say, here are our stopping points. You know, in the morning, see you later, and everybody walks at their own speed and stops where they want and does what they want. And we meet up at the end of the day. That's sort of more a guided one. Or would we be more independent than that and say, we're going from here and 10 days later we're getting there, and it's kind of up to you to look after yourself in between? I'm not so sure that would work. I'd feel like I was letting them down a little bit. I don't know why. But for people who hadn't walked a Camino before, you know, particularly say a couple with 2 kids, you know, I'd feel better knowing that they had sort of bookings made and things like that. But that's something to be discussed, isn't it? How are we going to work that? And then the final one I've got is accommodation, in terms of accommodation types. So again, having 10 or 12 people is a bit of a challenge, trying to get 10 or 12 beds in one spot. But are we generally looking for private accommodation? And if you're watching this, you know, private accommodation doesn't have to be expensive. I got a private room on my last Camino for 15 euros, I think. Shared bathroom, but perfectly good private room. You can still get, you know, rooms for 25, 30 euros, a couple and 2 kids, you know, that's not bad value. It's cheaper than an albergue. Does everybody want to have a go at the albergue experience? Gee, that would require booking ahead to get 12 beds. So that means it's got to be an albergue that allows bookings. You see where I'm coming from? It's the whole logistics of it, as there's a few things to think about. But I'd happily take that on and act as the tour company, if you like, and get everything booked up. It's not that difficult, but the pure fact that there's quite a few people needs a bit of thought and maybe some pre-planning and booking ahead. So there we go. If you're thinking of walking as a family, what are the big standouts? How far can they walk each day? How long do they want to spend on the Camino? What sort of accommodation do they want? What do people have as different expectations? Things like that. So sure it can be done. Lots of people do it. Just requires a little bit more thought, a little bit of compromise. I did one recently on walking with your spouse, so it's not too dissimilar to that. But anyway, to my family, my kids, grandkids, have I put you off yet, or are we going to do it? We'll at our next family lunch, we'll have to decide and start planning. Thanks for watching. If you've walked as a large group or as a family, do comment down below. What are some of the challenges you found? What are some of the traps to look out for? You know, little Johnny got sick on day 2, or, you know, Mary was sick of it by day 3. You know, I'd love to hear your comments, and we can share the things to consider. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.